MFP community, we are back for another episode of the Just Show Up podcast. So this one's going to be a heartfelt conversation with Joe and I. We're going to reflect a little bit about some of these circumstances what happened at the CrossFit Games this past weekend. So again, if you aren't really sure, if you're a new member kind of listening to this, I highly recommend you listen to last week's podcast where Joe and I really talked about the CrossFit Games and what it means to the CrossFit community. But obviously, if you are, an OG CrossFitter with MFP and you really pay attention to the CrossFit Games world, obviously there's a lot of things going on. So we're going to talk about that today and really reflect on what it means to our MFP community, and more importantly, like what can we learn from tragedy and what can we learn from events that aren't necessarily positive, and how can we maybe transmute this negative energy that is circulating, and how can we just learn from it. So that's our goal today. And so let's get started with just 3 breaths, get grounded. It's going to get a little deep. So get yourselves ready to buckle up. All right. So it's all. And just taking a quick reflection here to just express gratitude for your loved ones. Whoever is in your life that supports you, you can connect with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's your friends, your family, your children. Just honor that they're here. Physical presence is still with us. Even if you have loved ones who are not with us still, just express gratitude for the legacy and the lessons that they left for you in your life. Let's take our 3 breaths. Take a deep inhale through your nose. Hold. Let it out. Inhale. Hold. Let it out. Last one. Deep breath in. Big hold. 3, 2, and exhale. All right. Good show. Let it rip.
All right. So just a brief quote from Leo Tolstoy. He wrote War and Peace. Just, if you're a nerd like me, you all know his work. So he says, everybody thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. So I just think, as we reflect on, who we are and the world we live in, like it's really important to just embody that sense of change that you want to see. I think a lot of people really forget to look inward, and they if they want to see change, but they still are engaging in certain patterns that, they kind of disapprove in with others, starting within, starting with yourself. And I think if everybody did that, it would just be such a game changer. So just looking inward and, understanding how you could be your best to serve others.
It's not just looking inward too, like we talked about almost every week. It's like, how do you look inward without judgment towards yourself and without judgment towards the outside world, which we're always being pulled to judge, or think a certain way, where, sometimes it's just super valuable just to, like you said, reflect on yourself and really, sit with what you're feeling and why you're feeling it.
Yep.
And it's going to perfectly segue into our topic for today. And before we get to that, just kind of notice, I kind of wanted to open up with this. I was thinking about this, but obviously we got a new flow. Check it out. We're at the gym, baby. And the idea here is, we obviously want to do this podcast at the gym. Some days are a little bit better than others. So trial and error. But if you do hear, the good old SEPTA just passing by, shh, hey, just take it as like you're here for a class, right? So, yeah, we're in the presence of the gym here to help us kind of use that as a tool to, reflect on what the meat and potatoes is of our conversation today, which is really coming back to the MFP community, right? How do we continue to serve you guys and just provide you little bits of knowledge and information and wisdom to help you continue your own journey of holistic self-discovery, not just the physical, but the mental, emotional, and the spiritual as well. So let's talk about first, before we talk about the games, let's just reflect on something that I wrote about when I was really thinking about this process of what happened at the games this past weekend was the idea of, like how fear comes into our lives. And I think we're all, I'm not going to say guilty as charged because this is natural, but, we catastrophize things. We'll sometimes think, obviously what's the like worst that can happen. And, this fear stems into anxiety and, these thoughts, and you kind of tell yourself, like, obviously, like, oh, that's not realistic. That wouldn't happen. But, until it does, like, how do we react? And we don't have a script for tragedy. We don't have a script or an outline for really difficult things in our lives and challenges. And so this is a blessing and it's a curse.
Yeah.
It provides us so much opportunity to grow and evolve, but it also is very hard in this moment when you have emotions and we have feelings of, worry, sadness, hate, anger, frustration, a broken heart and all these things. And so like, how do we come back to, like you said, like coming back inward and coming back to this concept of oneness, love, and so many things that we're going to touch on. So really what happened at this past week in the 2024 CrossFit Games was the first event was a run, a 3.5-mile run into a 800-meter open swim. And so like last week, we were talking about all this excitement for the games this year and how it was going to be so much different than past years and, all these logistics. And this event was really unique because they've never done something where they went into the water after a run. It was always like water first and then run. Mm-hmm. And I'm watching the live feed. I take a little break as people were kind of like coming out of the water. And next thing you know, I get like a text from my wife, and she says like, oh, one of the athletes went underwater. And the first thing I was just like doing this catastrophizing, like, oh my God, like everything's over. Like someone died. Yeah. And essentially that's what happened. This athlete was close to the finish line and he drowned. It was about 50 meters close and he drowned for reasons still that are being investigated and unknown. But the media kind of put it out there, an athlete drowned. We're going to, still waiting what's happened. And 2 hours passed and, it was confirmed. And the athlete, his name is Lazar Dukic from Siberia. And obviously the CrossFit Games is a very well-known international, worldwide, global event. And it's a beautiful event to bring all these cultures and all these competitors and all these people that do CrossFit from around the world to one space to celebrate. And it just became a nightmare in an instant with like first workout.
Yeah.
And it was devastating to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. Like, my first response was just like, how does this happen? Pretty much like it just made no sense to me. And I think that, I just was in that same boat, like thinking like about what the implications are for, the games and, what this is going to look like for the community. Just, when we think about open water swimming, it is, just a very dangerous activity. And like, sometimes, we forget like the risks of that. And I was I'm still shocked about it. I think that my biggest thought that I had is just like how is this even possible? Like how is it even possible for? And it was it was so strange, because it was like
So strange.
it was so close to the finish line, and then you start like speculating, right? Like it must have been this, it must have been that cardiac event, like, and then the truth is none of us know, and I don't, like obviously there'll be investigations, but the only reality we know is it happened, and it was like just a truly tragic event that I think will change, a lot of leadership structure around the CrossFit Games, as it should, because I do think, you know, there could have been better safety in that open water. Like there could have been more protocols in place. And I think in terms of like powers that be organizing CrossFit Games, we'll see change. But, the CrossFit community, like, everything else here is just finding strength in, you know, being together and supporting each other through it.
Well said. Yeah, and I think what you were saying too, with a lot of people were so much in shock, obviously, of the fact that someone died during a CrossFit Games event. I mean, the games are again coming on their 18th year, and these athletes over these 18 years have endured brutal physical tasks. Because again, they're coining the fittest on earth. Like this is what they train for, to be in these very risky environments. That doesn't that doesn't mean that there should not be above and beyond protocols to make sure they're safe. But a lot of the shock is like Lazar Dukic is a high level CrossFit Games competitor. And from someone who analyzes these things myself and knows a lot about the athletes, like he's been competing for 5 years, which is a well-seasoned veteran, especially over the past 5 years, of how hard it is to even make it to the CrossFit Games and how good you have to be. And not only that, like he's a top 10 competitor at the games every single year, and he is very well known within the CrossFit Games community. And he's also a strong swimmer, or known to be a strong swimmer, and known to have this, engine to push past through a lot of things.
Yeah.
And CrossFit's done a handful of open water swims, paddleboarding. They've always kind of been first, and there's been a handful of CrossFit events, internationally, or even one like called Wadapalooza in Miami over the past, 15 years, where like you'll do an open water swim, and there's, I mean, I could say for myself, competing in Wadapalooza, like I've done many of those swims there's very little supervision, and I'm thankful that I'm still alive because I'm such a poor swimmer, to be honest. But yeah, just to imagine, like you said, the fact that even happened is just a shock within itself, and it's the more important thing to recognize of like how heartbreaking and sad this is for community. Because again, we've talked about, like, again last week, and if you're a newbie to CrossFit listening to us, know that the CrossFit Games, they are essentially a separate entity. You have like CrossFit Games and the CrossFit brand. The CrossFit Games are an extension of what we do here. Like we talked about, like the Open and all these things that we still participated in as a community. But, I think it's just recognizing that like this person was a representation of CrossFit and the CrossFit Games. They're family.
Yeah.
And so you feel almost like nothing. Maybe some of you guys know nothing about him, don't really know much about the games, but like you feel this sense of sadness within yourself because like nobody deserves that. And obviously CrossFit and CrossFit HQ and the games, like nobody wants that for anybody, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's just a complete tragedy, and it really shook up a lot of our global CrossFit community as a whole, especially for those who love the game so much and really value for what the games have done for us.
I think that, a lot of it comes down to just like, in other lines of work, like we talk a lot about ego and like the getting so caught up in ego and what that can bring. And like when I watched what happened with this high level athlete drowning, like, you know, I find it, I mean, it's upsetting for a million reasons, but one, like, I really believe it was a preventable death.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like sometimes, you know, in sports, you do have freak things. Like,
Yeah.
I've played baseball
Yeah.
my whole life. There have been baseballs to the head that have been like, that's just an unpreventable tragic death.
Yeah.
You know, my wife rides horses. Like, people have fallen off horses.
Yep.
But like, I felt like the CrossFit Games leadership took for granted the level and skill of these athletes. And, you know, my brother was a lifeguard. I was never a lifeguard, but I know a lot of people who are lifeguards, and lifeguards are trained to see clear signs of drowning. And if there were true lifeguards in the water, like, it was preventable. And it just, you know, I think the games has grown so much, and these athletes are, like we talked about last week, they're so impressive. They're so, like, this guy, you know, Lazar was an amazing swimmer, and you don't really think like, hey, like, these are humans too. You lose that element, and your ego gets a little too big, and then you don't have enough. There's not enough safety protocol. There's not enough lifeguards there's not enough lifeguards nearby. You know, when you kind of just get in that place of, and it might be arrogance. Like, there's a lot of reasons why it could have happened, but like, you know, I think when we go back to our lives, like, how do we both here and at home make sure we never take anything for granted? You know, make sure we don't take safety for granted. Make sure we don't take, you know, our fitness for granted. Make sure we don't take, you know, our activities for granted. Like, it's important. Like, none of us are invincible.
Yeah, and that's kind of like where my mind was at, right? And the first thing my mind was at was obviously, you know, just this. I mean, I had 2 hours to contemplate this because I was driving down the shore and all I could think about was this tragedy. I'm trying to, you know, think about something else and be excited for a really special weekend to, you know, just relax and take some time off. But I really started going down, you know, a deep dive of like what this actually means because I could be, I think I have a fortunate background to understand some of these concepts of working through a lot of adversity. And obviously, I want to state first, like, I cannot put myself in the place of any of those individuals that were there that day, the athletes, the organization, but I can feel emotionally what they're going through, and I can just only process that. And obviously, being a loyal CrossFit Games, you know, advocate and an affiliate owner, and just like worrying about like what this looks like. You know, maybe we can talk about down the road, but I also really wanted to contemplate about like what does this actually mean for our MFP community? Like, what does it mean for you guys? Like, what is this tragic situation? What can we like learn from something like this? Kind of just how you put it, to that's going to allow us to grow, evolve, and learn.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're going to come back to this concept of like, how can we find light in this really dark situation? And for me, it was really coming back to, you know, like, what does this idea of, and this is a big thing a lot of the athletes in the games and talk about, what we talk about, you know, one, you know, how do you honor this individual? How do you correctly, you know, grieve, and how do we, you know, come together? These are all big things of just speculation and thought. And, you know, for you guys, again, like, just like this obviously isn't going to change anything you guys do here on a day-to-day basis at MFK.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, you guys are still going to come in, he'll still have a great community, great workout, but the concept of grief is a valuable tool to understand in our lives because, you know, we're all going to experience it. You know, it's not going to be in this type of situation, but there's going to be something in our personal lives that we're going to have this emotion of grief. We're going to have these emotions of fear, emotions of worry, hate, anger, frustration. And like, what are these tools that we have in our toolbox to come back to center and to come back to like trying to shift our narrative? into something that is fulfilling for us and purposeful. So one of the quotes that I really loved to hear was that the athletes, when they well, let me trace back. So I don't want to go too off on a tangent here. So going back into what did the games decide to do? So I think this is interesting for you guys to understand. So this was Friday. This was Thursday. The event happened, and so obviously, immediately when they found out, they canceled Thursday's events, and the games is stuck with figuring out like, okay, are we actually going to continue the CrossFit Games? And obviously, most people's reactions are like, I don't even know what to think. Like, I can only imagine being a competitor and wanting to compete after something like that happens. Like, you're just sick to your stomach. And so what they decided to do was continue with the games because they ended up getting feedback from all the athletes, all the competitors, coaches, organization people, sponsors. They decided to continue with the games in a way where they could honor Lazar for what he's done for the CrossFit community. But they also gave the option for athletes of, hey, if like you do not want to compete, that's fine, opt out. If you want to compete and honor, fine, opt in. They'll make it more like an exhibition. And it was really just trying to go in this back and forth battle of trying to not judge each other, or put yourself in people's position of like understanding how people grieve and how that their decision is best what serves them. Because I think we have to be mindful of, like we talked about last week, like these athletes sacrifice so much to be in that position. And not saying that competing is going to feel great, but maybe that's their way to honor Lazar, and that's for them like something for them to be able to manage this. Or if the athletes who didn't compete because it didn't feel right for them, like is that like you have to honor that and have no judgment to that because that's how they feel. And also for the games, like having judgment towards the organization for continuing it on. Obviously, that's going to be debatable. But how do we, again, just try to understand that they're all going through something. And so all the decisions that were made were trying to just look out for what everyone and respect everyone's, grief in that time. And kind of going back to the story, what I was talking about, they continued with the games. And one of the workouts was Chad, and that's 1,000 step-ups for time, that hero workout. And that's workout before they went on the floor. Sarah Wilkinson, who was Chad's sister, she spoke to the athletes about, what does it mean to grieve, and like, what does it mean to lose somebody in the blink of an eye that you love so much, and like, how do you handle that? She just said grief is love with nowhere to go. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my own perspective of like how powerful that is. But everybody's feeling the same thing. We're all feeling love and an emotion that's deviated from love, whether if it's hate, whether if it's frustration, anger, whether if it's in the other spectrum, we go the other way. But we all want to feel love, and we're losing that ability to feel that. So we're kind of just stuck in this limbo of grieving. So I thought that was powerful. So enough of me on that tangent, but
I mean, like as soon as Dukic died, like there was no winning. Like it was the whole everything. Right. Every scenario was a lose just through that loss, and then it's just like, how do you choose to navigate this situation where like it's only loss, and there wasn't canceling the games wouldn't have been right, and continuing wasn't right. Like the situation already was what it was. Like, so I think that every athlete processed it in their own way. Some competed, some tried to compete, and then just after an event or two just couldn't do it. Some went home, but I think that the most frustrating part when all of this happened was like people deciding, like, especially on social media, like who to blame, who to blame, who to point the finger at. And I just think it's so much more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do think there are people who are going to have to answer the questions about this. That might be Castro, could be Don Fall. Like, there are people who are going to have to answer the most pressing questions, but like at the end of the day, like weaponizing blame is just never a helpful tool. And that's not to say that like, those responsible for not having enough lifeguards or not having enough, shouldn't be responsible. Like, they should be, like, but it's dangerous to get in this like blame weaponization place. Like, I think it's time that like we really look at this and see, how do we just think about, find gratitude for our loved ones and for our ability to, like, when I showed up here on Friday morning, like, I was just so grateful to be here.
Mm-hmm.
I was grateful to be with the community.
Yes.
Like I saw, like, I don't know, like when I saw like him before his last event, like, imagine, like, he just truly had no idea when he was going to do a CrossFit workout and that was the end of his life. Like, it just, for me, I just was putting my life in perspective. Like, I'm just little things. I'm just so grateful to be here. And, I think it's helpful to have just finding some sort of like light is always the most therapeutic way, at least, to navigate these feelings of grief, because that anger and blame just, it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to serve you or others.
Well, I think that's also the important part that we could take just in any situation in our lives. If we ever face stuff like this, is like, how do we learn to have a perspective with non-judgment? And that's going to vary depending on an event and situation in your life,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. How do we recognize blame and try to come back to like connection?
Yeah.
And then also, how do we, one of the most potent forms of healing is forgiveness.
Yeah.
And, that's going to be something for obviously Lazar's family to work with one day. Is like, is there going to be forgiveness? And obviously there's kind of a spectrum of like, should forgiveness be earned, or do we just learn how to forgive regardless of the outcome?
Yeah.
I think that's also something maybe that's a spiritual path that we all have to recognize that our own lives in our own unique way. But I think coming back to, like you're talking about, like, what is this bigger picture for us is the idea of the community coming back together bigger and better than ever.
Yeah.
If we just talk about the general CrossFit community, not even like the organization, because like you said, the organizations, there's going to have to be some infrastructure changes from that, but that's not going to affect you guys. But in terms of like us in the CrossFit community, like we all have something that has a commonality. We all have something that we bond over. We all have something that we suffer over, whether if it's the workouts we do or whether if it's the tragedy that happened that we're feeling. And how do we just use this as a tool to just have gratitude for our own feelings and the way we're feeling, but also gratitude and appreciation for what others are feeling.
Yeah.
And the more we can come back to this essence of love, this feeling of compassion and connection, it's not easy. It's a very difficult path, but it's one that has a lot of purpose for us if we can come back to that. And I think for me, I come back to a situation like this and I use a lot of my spiritual tools about understanding like, what does death really mean? When we have a death of an individual, loved one, anything, a death of something, a death of an idea, a death of whatever that may be in your life. I only know that there's one aftermath of death, and it's the concept of rebirth. There's something new comes out of it. Now we have the free will to navigate, like, do we want to have a positive rebirth of something? Like, we can make it negative, but I mean, positivity is really how we grow. And like you just were saying, like, just coming back to like the gym the next day and just like having a new love and gratitude that like you don't get to express, often, or that you would want to express more, or if that's towards our loved ones. Like, immediately when that happened, I just wanted to express, like, to my wife, like, how much I loved her, and like I was just, happy that she's in my life, and the people that are in my life. And big rebirth for CrossFit is like learning from this mistake. Whatever the mistake is, something good will come from this. Like, something good will come from the organization, and they're going to have to fix. And then again, it's going to be on others' decision to rebirth forgiveness, rebirth trust in an organization, because again, they really want to like serve something powerful and great to the community. And like, how do we come back to a rebirth of coming together? How do we come back to a rebirth of just a perspective in life, or an awareness of grief? And more importantly for me, like, I talk about, a rebirth of like, what does our soul really want? And it wants to grow, and it wants to come back to love. And this is maybe sometimes a hard thing to grasp, but I talk about the idea of like a soul contract, and like part of the contract that our soul makes when it comes to this planet to embody itself into a human, physical reality, is that it's going to experience some hard shit. It's going to experience pain, suffering, discomfort, loss. It's also going to experience all the beautiful things in life. The soul doesn't get that when it leaves the physical body and it continues on. And so, but this is the quickest way to learn how to become a more, we'll just say, enlightened individual. And if if your soul doesn't learn it in this physical manifestation in this time, it's going to continue to move on until it learns from its past reincarnations. Like, how do I learn to come back to like love? And like, yeah, these are really hard, but like every time I go through something hard, something good can come out of that if I allow it to. And I think one example from that everyone can relate to is, like, for example, like 9/11. We know 9/11's coming up, and that was by far, at least within like our lifetimes, we're still young, but like that was by far the most catastrophic tragedy, that we had to go through as a collective nation, as a whole. And it's not none of the stuff that I'm saying is going to bring anybody back. It's not going to bring Lazar back. It's not going to bring all those people back from 9/11, but it was something good to come out of that. And I can truly say that, like, our nation came together and we learned so many things, and it was a tragedy, but we have that decision to learn something.
I mean, I always say, like, life really is just, life's about choices, and like, when it comes to tragedy, Lazar's passing, no matter what happened that led to it, no matter, what could have been done differently, and a lot could have been done differently to prevent it. The only thing that we can do is control like our actions right now, like present moment. That's all we have. And it's like, life's about choices. Like, do we want to choose growth, or do we want to choose the opposite? And I think it's really important, no matter, to like fight those urges of like anger and frustration and blame, and like choose growth, choose forgiveness no matter how challenging it is, and like choose to find, choose to be uncomfortable, and and just make changes in your own life and with the people you love and your community that will better serve them because of something that happens, and I think that's what we could do here. And like, perspective for our own members, like, never taking anything for granted. Even if it's something as simple as going to the beach with your kids.
The dishwasher.
Dishwasher, like, yeah, like we were talking about, not taking anything for granted, like just truly like the little things, like just being grateful for it. And, it's not always easy, but like you'll feel right when you do that. Like that's the way that like your soul does want to live like that,
Definitely grateful for our cats that my wife and I have. So I came home to the cats, made sure to give them plenty of playtime and pets and some love and care. So the little things. I think that's the biggest thing to hear now. That's really what we can always come back to. So again, I know this is all like, I don't necessarily want to say sappy stuff, but it's important, right? I mean, like I said, we're all gonna face hard stuff. So, like, where do we have a toolbox? Gratitude's one of the bigger things, and that's kind of the reason why, we do our gratitude work here to help you guys expand that toolbox to like using that when you go through your darkest times.
Yeah.
So, again, what does all this mean for you guys with the CrossFit community? Again, like we said, just taking, the idea of a tragic death and, what can you learn from that in your lives? And really, nothing from an infrastructure standpoint is going to, change here at MFP and what we do on a day-to-day basis. We're our own unique affiliate owner. And so, we're just going to keep grinding. We're still going to celebrate, the Open for what it brings for us. And, the games might go through some changes and, even some of the infrastructure of CrossFit might go through some changes. But again, I'm truly a believer that, and I've learned this, and I know it's kind of like the most woo-woo thing to say and it's kind of annoying, but like everything does happen for a reason. I truly know and believe that and understand that and have applied it into my life and accepted and surrendered to it. So everything happens for a reason. And just like you guys are all members at MFP for a reason, I just have a lot of great gratitude and I'm super grateful for everyone that does continue to show up here on a day-to-day basis and having the coaches like you and just these opportunities in my life are amazing. So, I think that's just the way to wrap it up.
Positive change, how could there be positive change, like in the face of something both tragic and preventable? Like how is there, like you have a choice between positive change or negative change. And it's really important then, to make that positive change to, number one, like not only be sure that like, it's much more than being sure that there's swim safety at
Right.
At events. Like obviously that's like the surface level issue, but the bigger issue is like how do we collectively grow and support each other better and like hear each other more and just be better as people, as affiliates, as a community. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the task. And there's going to be some infrastructure change with, the CrossFit Games and HQ, but in general, like, affiliates are
thriving.
They're going to they're going to be strong and choose to make that positive change.
Yeah. That's where that's the way the earth is pulling us to, guys. It's the frequency's moving up. We're all going to learn how to be positive at some point. So, again, rest in peace, Lazar. I just wanted to say that, and obviously everything that I'm saying, even the spiritual shaman stuff all comes out of just, again, the goal to bring people together, regardless if, you guys buy into my intuitive thoughts or spiritual thoughts of it. But I think there's always something good that we can take from this. And, I'm not going to put myself in any of the shoes of any of the people that were there or have any judgment towards that. So, we're just going to keep moving on here at MFP. And, hopefully you guys learned something from this podcast this week. And, just stay tuned. We got some fun things coming up for the fall and some cool opportunities for you guys. So I know the summer's kind of dragging down a little bit, sorry, not sorry, but the fall is a great time for our community and it's a great time to do some fun workouts, especially when you're not suffering in the heat. So yeah, just stay tuned for the next few weeks, and we got a fun guest for next week on our podcast. So we got an MFP member coming up. We'll let you guys. We'll save the juice for when we get there. All right. Cool. All right. Well, again, Coach Marco, Coach Joe.
Yep.
All right. Just show
See
up.
y'all.
All right. See you guys.
Peace.